This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglin.
Imagine if you could set out on foot at Breaks Interstate Park in Virginia and walk to Jellicoe, Tennessee, 120 miles, and be surrounded by forest and wilderness the whole way. That's what the Pine Mountain Wildlife Corridor is all about. It's the largest landscape-level project ever undertaken in the state, all for the benefit of wildlife. We go inside outdoors this week to talk about the project with the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Did you grab the mayonnaise?
We've got to meet Bob and Cindy at the little store to buy some lunch stuff. Where's John?
He said he left something in his room. He's coming. Did you grab the mayonnaise?
What do you think? Ham, chips? I put that mustard we like in the cooler.
Did you grab the mayonnaise? Oh, here he comes.
Good. He grabbed his life jacket. I should have remembered that.
Did you grab the mayonnaise?
Cupcakes. I want those yellow cupcakes.
Tell your phone.
Boaters are busy, on and off the water. That's why Kentucky conservation officers remind you, your life jacket's got your back.
That fish weighed 10 pounds.
10. That's the magic word.
Honey, I hadn't been there 10 minutes.
If he says 10, he's lying. And he says 10 a lot.
You gotta be happy you married me.
I can hear it coming.
Admit it. I'm your perfect 10.
Honey, why don't you take 10?
Tenfold.
Your Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you, fishing's not about math. It's about fun.
And fudging a little if you need to.
Kentucky Fishing. Be honest.
It'll make a liar out of you.
You are listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin, and the outdoors is a big place, and most of it is privately owned. There are several groups out there that work to buy and safeguard and protect our forests and fields and rivers, and they can range from local governments, city, county governments, state agencies like state parks, Fish and Wildlife, and others. And one I want to introduce you to today, the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust. Its executive director is Hugh Archer, and Hugh, welcome.
Glad to be here.
It's good to sit down to talk to somebody who's a friend of the good earth. Immediately, though, that makes you sound like, oh, God, he's one of them. He's a tree hugger. He's one of these environmentalists. But maybe I could dumb it down a little bit by saying you're a good friend to Pine Mountain, good friend to Blanton Forest, good friend to Kentucky. Now you're one of us.
Graduated from the University of Kentucky in '76 and started as a young entry lawyer for $11,000 state salary and got assigned to the Nature Preserves Commission and forestry, and the Nature Preserves caught my attention. I learned about heritage programs documenting the concentrations of rare species. I got involved with the Nature Preserves Commission, and Don Harker in those days was the director, and he talked me into applying for the Nature Conservancy because they decided they would have a chapter in Kentucky in 1980.
Is that when the Nature Conservancy got started in this state?
I believe this year is the 40th anniversary, so they'd been around about 9 years as a volunteer group. They had Bill Martin and Bill Bryant and Mary Wharton.
Yeah, anyone in conservation would know those names. Mm-hmm. If you're not, just know that they, too, are friends of the good earth here in Kentucky. Now, though, with the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, is that unique to Kentucky? Is that a nationwide group?
A little of both. There are probably 700 land trusts in the country that own 90% of the easements. And typically land trusts are oriented to accepting easement gifts, granting deductions, and then monitoring and managing the development rights not being abused on land. And it works for forest and ag and, all sorts of things. But we have always focused on the rarest ecosystems, reassembling large forest blocks, and trying to use concentrations of rare species, plants and animals, we have about 700 in Kentucky, labeled that way, as indicators of the best remaining natural lands. And that drove us to Pine Mountain. We set up Kentucky Natural Lands Trust when we discovered Blanton Forest, and nobody had the money to pay for it. So we raised about $3 million and bought this one of the most unique old-growth forests left in the world. There's one like it in China. probably the most diverse old-growth forest this side of the Mississippi.
That is Blanton Acres. Blanton Forest.
Yeah, it's about 2,400 acres of uncut forest, and we're up. By the end of the summer, I hope it's going to be 6,000-acre preserve.
It just keeps growing and growing. Because of Blanton Forest, your group, Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, has come into existence. That was the middle 90s. So, relatively speaking, you're the newcomer, newcomer in the field of conservation.
Well, I learned my trade under the tutelage of the national hotshots at the Nature Conservancy, and my land trust is more like the Nature Conservancy. We buy fee property if possible rather than seek easements. We use easements as a fallback. But you have to use both, especially if you get off the southeastern land prices and start working around Louisville, where it jumps from $3,000 to $9,000 an acre. Our number 2 project, other than the 125-mile Pine Mountain uplift, where a seventh of the state's rare species exist in that ecosystem, plants and animals. We are also trying to connect Bernheim to Fort Knox along Crooked Creek, Wilson Creek, some of the riparian connectors that go through the land between. Because Bernheim's already 15,000 acres, and Fort Knox is 110. You don't have to buy too much.
How much do you have to buy between those two?
Probably a couple thousand acres.
Is that a doable thing? Is that along a corridor?
Yes.
How wide would that corridor be?
Well, we're starting with Crooked Creek and getting everything we can. We've bought 3 tracts and have 2 easements along Crooked Creek now, and I'm negotiating 6 new easements and a 560-acre purchase along that corridor if we can afford it.
Here's one thing. I can't get into the mind of a wild animal, but one thing the Kentucky Natural Land Trust does is buys land so that there is a contiguous habitat. I mean, it's not just chopped up and fragmented. It's not patchy.
Exactly.
It's there all in one. They can go from A to B, and it's a long distance. But how does the deer know what is the deer's land and what is the private farmers? Yeah,
that's a good question, but they'll follow the areas that are of contiguous forests, the places with the fewest roads, etc. So Pine Mountain, for example, is 125 miles with 6 2-lane roads breaking it up. It's almost a contiguous forest block through the eastern coal fields. And with climate change, things got to move north and south. They got to move east and west. They got to move in altitude to stay in their niches so they can continue to survive. And entire tree communities can move over time along the Pine Mountain corridor. We have half the state forested, which makes it just incredible to live in Kentucky, and 25 acres per person. It's an amazing place to be on that level.
Yes.
But the average forest is under 40 acres in a privately owned tract. So we're trying to put Humpty Dumpty together again. If you don't have 2,000 acres of forest in a contiguous group, you don't have internal forest habitat, you get edges only. Now, I know you all like all those game species, and they do fine on the edges, but a lot of the birds won't nest unless they got 1,000 or 2,000 acres in a forest land.
Here's something slightly off the subject. I was in recent years Canada, Alberta, British Columbia, and they will have, it's beautiful there, but they will have wildlife crossings. They've got major highways just like the United States, but like 4 or 6 lane highway. They've got these, I can't remember what they were called really, but wildlife bridges.
Right.
Huge. They were wide. They would have to be half a football field, maybe as wide as a football field, covering so that these animals can get across the Trans-Canada Highway.
Well, a lot of people don't take it for granted. One of our clients right now we're trying to buy a piece of Crooked Creek from is actually from Holland. Hans van der Steur. And I was telling him about how the most expensive thing wouldn't be the land between Bernheim and Fort Knox. It would be digging a hole under the interstate or putting a bridge over the top, which might be as much as $30 million.
Has that been brought up? If you want to cross Interstate 65, 75, any of the parkways, to do that?
We've been always trying to keep a wildlife crossing as part of the game. Hans van der Steur sent me a picture from Holland the other day. They have a squirrel crossing in Holland, a little triangular metal thing across rhinoceros.
Nice.
The squirrels cannot get hit by that. There are different designs for predators and the deer, and the U.S. DOT has money to do it. Back when we almost built it before for $30 million, the project got killed. There were editorials, everybody didn't understand it, and I'm outraged too. How much it costs to dig a hole into the interstate's just amazing.
We got to get to a break, and Hugh Archer is my guest with the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust. We'll be back with more. I'm Charlie Baglin. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin, talking today about the Pine Mountain Wildlife Corridor, largest conservation project of its kind ever in the state. Key partner in the project, the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, and the guest today is Mr. Hugh Archer, the executive director. Wildlife conservation, habitat conservation, one of those topics, if you are into it, you know that it's necessary. If you're not, well, I don't know, I'll drive down the road, I see plenty of fields out there, everything looks fine to me. Where I want to go with that is, you are one of several players in the conservation field. For example, the nature license plate people, and they're made up of Nature Conservancy, they're made up of your group, made up of nature preserves, state parks, Division of Forestry, Fish and Wildlife, and all their...
And Wild Rivers.
And Wild Rivers program. There's a lot of people out there vying to do the same thing. Is there competition, or as long as the land is preserved, we're happy? Doesn't really matter who did it as long as it's done.
That's the way I feel. I've been building horizontal structures across the independent conservation groups. I'm on 6 different boards, so I can make them talk to each other. That's a role I've assigned myself almost my entire career, and it came from the years of doing geographic information system consulting, because information's pretty universal and everybody had their smokestacks and their power base, but once you got everybody sharing data, especially across maps, and broke down some of those smokestacks of budget fights, everybody had a synergy in terms of understanding watersheds and understanding the habitat better. I think when it comes to wildlife preservation, though, and you as State Fish knows more about this than anybody, the lack of apex predators is just critical. I mean,
lack of apex predators, that's a big term.
Like elk without wolves.
Elk without wolves, bobcats, mountain lions.
Right.
We do have bobcats.
Oh, yeah.
But the mountain lions, the wolves, we don't have.
Right.
Can you suffice it to say, well, we have coyotes.
That's better than nothing.
Bobcats. Does that really fill the niche?
I think we've got to work on that. I mean, humans do a bit of it. The hunters help, and we need more of them, actually, not less.
Yeah. But your point about the lack of apex predators, because if there were, then we would be more like Alaska and northern Montana, where wildlife is in balance, or at least far more so than having to have the reliance on people who fish, people who hunt, trap, to sort of fill that gap, to make it a friendly place, this world a friendly place for people to live and not have to worry about going out the door at night and being startled by a wolf out there. The Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, you protected 7,000 acres along Pine Mountain.
Right.
And I saw something recently in the news. You had a headline out there. Let me find this. Kentucky's Natural Lands Trust expands the largest conservation effort in the Commonwealth's history. That's a pretty bold statement.
Oh, yeah.
Explain that.
Well, we like to take credit for everything everybody's done, but in the 30s, Pine Mountain started being protected with gifts of the Continua forest blocks from the U.S. Forest Service, disjunct tracts from Daniel Boone that they'd ended up owning, and they gave to forestry. And then Fish and Wildlife came along and bought that wildlife management area, probably with federal money, too. It's old history. I'm not sure where it was funded, but those 2 blocks along Pine Mountain are what got it started. And since then, we've established 4 state parks, 19 nature preserves, additions to the Continua and other state forest blocks down in Whitley County. It's starting to make a contiguous... So, I mean, KNLT just started filling in the gaps. Blanton was right in the dead center of that 125-mile uplift and corridor, the first of the Appalachian Ridges after the Rocky Mountains. It meets all the poster child climate change resilience model tests. It's got the limestone exposure in the caves on the north side. It's got north-south and east-west altitude changes. And since it doesn't have, the coal eroded off a few 100,000 years ago, so it was affordable. Yeah, and still there. That's why it's still there. It didn't have coal, and it's a wonderful bridge to build and protect into the future for our grandchildren. A route that's going to help preserve lots of species, not just game species. They found a new gentian that was unknown to science 2 years ago on Pine Mountain. It's a fascinating place. But again, we're not just trying to save that flower. We're using those rare species, that 1/7, 110 rare species of plants and animals, as indicators that that ecosystem is still intact. And that's what makes it a contiguous large. There's a 10-county project around the Green River that Western Kentucky University, the Heritage Program, and TNC have been working on for years. That will probably linearly be bigger, but not as many acres because they're not going as broadly. We're trying to buy a 5 to 10 mile width for 125 miles, connect Jellicoe up to Breaks Interstate Park.
That'd be a pretty good stretch of land.
It's a lot of land.
You brought with you several maps here, and they're sort of scattered around on my counter. But I'm hoping that in this pile, it's highlighted in white, Hugh. Now, for anybody just listening along, tell me where we are in the state. Give me some landmarks. Pineville, for example. Can we start there?
Yeah, Pineville, where the gap, not the Cumberland Gap, but the other gap of the South Fork of the Cumberland River breaks through Pine Mountain, right at Pineville. And the Pine Mountain State Park that many people are familiar with.
Sure.
If you're going south, is on the right of the gap. And on the left is private land. And we, after 14 years, I think we're going to buy 2,400 acres this year, called the Knuckles Enterprise Tract. It's one of the largest private tracts left on the mountain. And then I've got 3 other projects around that. And we're hoping to sort of fill in a big block of land across the gap at Pineville from the Pine Mountain State Park. We work on past Pine Mountain State Park down to Jellicoe in Whitley County, very isolated. They call it, the voting district down there is still called South America.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah, it's been in South America for 120 years.
I was not aware. The Pine Mountain Wildlife Corridor, according to the map you've shown me here, it begins with the Greater Blanton Forest Complex down to the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area. Is that the right map? Blanton's
right in the middle of the 125 miles, and when we first set up KNLT, it was just to buy Blanton Forest. And then my board said, let's do the whole mountain.
Do the whole mountain.
And I said, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm glad I'm not the director. I was on the board at that time.
Buy a whole mountain, sure.
And I believe that was Mark Evans and Don Harker pushed that fun concept through, and that's been my life for the last 20 years as a result.
If we start here at Breaks Interstate Park up in Virginia, Kentucky, how many miles is it down?
125 miles according to the Geological Survey, and there's another 10 miles down into Tennessee. You're mostly on top of the mountain when on I-75 headed for Knoxville when you cross the boundary.
Out of curiosity, what is so special about the top of the mountain?
Just south and just north of Pine Mountain, of course, are the big mountaintop removal jobs and 200 years of coal mining. The coal eroded off Pine Mountain, so it's mostly just forest land and oil and gas wells. The tippy top is the Pine Mountain Trail target, which is very important because that's our 120-mile piece of the Great Eastern Trail, which is being built from New York to Alabama. It'll be bigger than the Appalachian Trail, and it'll be a very important tourism attractor.
Indeed, it would. Yeah. Blazing that trail. Is the trail partially made already?
Yeah, it was established as a linear state park under Governor Patton, and then it's been reduced since to a park project or something. They don't call it a linear park anymore in the statute, but there's money set aside at the Heritage Board, allocations to the Parks Department to buy additional trail segments. Fortunately, we quickly got gifts and purchased the little strips of trail that people were willing to sell. Most of the rest of the trail we'll have to buy the entire block of land that includes the top to finish building the trail. Those that are going to just give the trail away did early on.
What I'm noticing here is that
Bell County in particular, in this big tract we're trying to get near the Gap, will be the biggest addition to the trail in many years. And we're trying to make sure that gets completed for a lot of reasons. We have a beautiful park system, as we've bragged about all my life, from Kentucky, 40, 50 beautiful parks, but they're developed. It's not that many acres, and they have golf courses, and they have wonderful restaurants and beautiful scenes, and they're protecting a lot, but that's still for active recreation, not to conserve the rare plants and animals.
It's nice, though, for state parks to have buffer zones around them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you're going to see some of the work that you're trying to get done.
Right. And we work closely with the Parks Department and are particularly focused on tracks they've identified they need for the trail.
The point I wanted to make here is that this is not just Kentucky Natural Lands Trust.
Absolutely
It's not just Fish and Wildlife or nature preserves. It's not just the Nature Conservancy. This is a team effort.
And it's the one that deserves it the most. It's our best chance at preserving an entire ecosystem that's definable. So it becomes more important every day with continued mining and continued mineral resource development.
The music is playing, Hugh. We need to take a break, but we will be back with more with the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust. I'm Charlie Baglin, and you're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Back on Kentucky Afield Radio, and you can always find us on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and put in Kentucky Afield Radio, and there we are. Let us know what you think. If you have show topic suggestions, we'll be glad to hear them. Kentucky Afield Radio. Like us, and you'll like us. It's time now for our fishing report.
This is Jeff Crosby with the Central District Fishing Report. Fishing continues to be very good across the district. Lake temperatures are running in the low to mid-60s. Largemouth bass are spawning at many of our area lakes. Therefore, these fish are shallow and can be caught on a wide variety of lures, such as spinner baits, shallow running or lipless crankbaits, jerk baits, or any type of variety of soft plastic baits. Additionally, you may want to try your luck at catching a few crappie at Benji Kimmon Lake, Bolts, Elmer Davis, or Beaver Lake. Crappie are currently shallow. Many are spawning at these lakes. Crappie can be caught on live minnows fished in about 4 to 7 foot of water around cover, or casting crappie jigs in these same areas. So good luck, good fishing, and hope to see you on the water.
This is Rob Rold in the Northwestern Fishery District. Nolin Lake is now back down to summer pool. Bass fishing's been good, casting a variety of crankbait on the rockier banks. White bass are still doing well at Nolin, especially in the upper end of the lake, say from around Sportsman's Paradise area up to Bacon Creek, using worms or curly-tailed jigs fishing on the bottom. Rough River Lake is still 11 feet over summer pool. They're catching a few bass in the flooded timber, mainly by casting jigs or buzz baits up into the flooded trees. Malone is also back down to normal pool. Several red ear were caught at Malone, as well as Mauzé Lake, Carpenter Lake, and the Peabody Management Area Lake. Seems all were doing well on red ear over the weekend. It seems to be hot all across the district.
Down at Kentucky Barkley Lakes, boy, fishing has been tough for some. We're going to fish for crappie out deep on ledges, minnows, jigs, and you could still cast the rocky shorelines with an inline spinner or a curly-tailed jig and maybe pick up a crappie here and there. But I think what I'd be concentrating on right now is catfish, bass, bluegill, and red ear. We had the full moon last weekend. Bluegill are up shallow, red ear should follow them. Bass are up shallow around the bushes. Hearing a lot of good reports about channel cats this year. It just seems like everybody's turning to channel catfish around the shorelines and having good success, either on poles or on jugs. In the tailwaters, they're starting to settle down after all the rain and the heavy discharges we've had. So hearing some good reports of striped bass and hybrid striped bass in the tailwaters. Well, this is Paul Reister, and I hope you find a good day to go fishing.
Connectivity. It's not just a term in a cell phone commercial. Hear how it applies to critters after the break.
Maybe I won't, but I could.
Maybe.
Yes, I won't.
Well, on second thought,
Yeah.
No. Mm-mm. Yes.
Arguing with yourself about life jackets? Well, the answer is yes. The answer has always been yes.
What the heck? Yes.
Could be you've just been lucky till now.
Yes.
This boating season, Kentucky conservation officers remind you your life jackets got your back.
That fish weighed 10 pounds.
10. That's the magic word.
Honey, I hadn't been there 10 minutes.
If he says 10, he's lying. And he says 10 a lot.
You gotta be happy you married me.
I can hear it coming.
Admit it. I'm your perfect 10.
Honey, why don't you take 10?
10-4.
Your Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you, fishing's not about math. It's about fun.
And fudging a little if you need to.
Kentucky Fishing. Be honest.
It'll make a liar out of you.
You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. I'm Charlie Baglin, your host, and the project we're talking about today is the Pine Mountain Wildlife Corridor. 120 miles of connected and protected wildlife forest blocks, an impressive undertaking by a variety of conservation partners, including the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust. Hugh Archer is the executive director in the studio with me, and Hugh, I know you are an attorney, but talk science.
Okay, I'll try. I hang out with science.
Ecosystem.
Okay.
And you preserve an entire ecosystem. What is it that you're preserving?
Well, mostly I'm following what people like Mark Evans and Ron Cicerillo and John McGregor have said.
These are brilliant biologists.
The top biologists in the state. I'd have to throw in Albert Meyer at Western.
Sure.
People like that. But I've always taken my directions from them. This is the best place in the state, and then I go by it. I am a lawyer, not the scientist. But Mark Evans in particular did the inventory work over 25 years on Pine Mountain and all over the rest of the state. I just think he singled it out early as an intact ecosystem because, again, we've got the limestone layers, caves on the north side. We've got a north, south, east, west corridor that allow everything from big elk to tree species to move with climate change and habitat change. It's really important to long-term biodiversity preservation. Some days I worry about the world coming to an end and the glaciers melting and everything, but I think it was Lee Andrews the other day said, I'm just trying to buy some land where some stuff can live. And that's basically what, but we're trying to buy the best land where the best stuff can still live and the most stuff can live.
This is quite the undertaking. So do you have a timeline on this? By when would you like to say we can wrap this up?
The south face, I believe we will complete a contiguous corridor from Virginia to Tennessee. Jellicoe to Breaks.
To Breaks.
And Frakes to Breaks, we like to say. Frakes is in Whitley County. Nobody knows what that is, but we're going to do a bumper sticker that says Frakes to Breaks. The north face has been cut up into little 100-acre strips and there's 1,000 tracks. And so on the north face, to finish that, it may exceed my lifespan, but it's also very, very important because that steeper side is the wet side. You know, the wettest places in Kentucky are along the north face of Pine Mountain, and the driest places in Kentucky are on the south face of Pine Mountain. The extremes in climate, the changes in altitude and the types of species that live high to low are what makes Pine Mountain so incredible, both visually and beautifully. And if you like salamanders, you know, this is the world's concentration of salamander diversity down there, and they have a lot to do with how the leaves get chewed up and how the ecosystem rebuilds itself and fixes itself. So it's just a treasure. And I think it was E.O. Wilson is now pushing long landscapes if we're going to save anything. You can't just buy a little spot and say that's where that orchid is.
Yeah.
Long landscapes, wildlife corridors, wildland corridors are all terms that we've been talking for 20 years, and they're coming more into vogue now as people realize how important it is. Connectivity and mobility for species is so important.
I was going to say, and I can't remember.
E.O. Wilson also said the loss of biodiversity is the thing our grandchildren will least forgive us. And I don't think we're
biodiversity. That's a lot of everything that's out there alive. Mm-hmm. And I have a phone call in now to the State Nature Reserves Commission saying I'd like to do a show on the greenery in this scenery. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's wrong with it? We look out, we see things that are green, but there's a lot of things missing, and there may be some plant life that shouldn't be there, or there should be plant life in more abundance than it is.
Right, absolutely. I think exotics, beetles that are eating the pine trees, the beetles that are eating the ash trees, the woolly adelgid that's eating our keystone species of hemlock. They protect the limbic systems in the upper watershed from damage and temperature shifts. Things can break down real fast with exotics. I think exotics are starting to do much more than bulldozers in terms of undermining the range of native species we used to have.
Exotic sounds like a nice word. It's what you want when you give a bird or a parrot or lovely flowers. Well, if you attach the word exotic, hey, it's got to be good.
I probably should be saying invasive species. Well, is probably the more appropriate.
Yeah, I would say that. But the truth of it is the perception of the word exotic is nice and exhilarating. But the truth of exotic, that means it's not from here, right. And it may not fit in biologically with what's already here. Mm-hmm. You can drive through southeastern Kentucky and areas and see kudzu. Kudzu is not from here. That's why it just grows with abandon. And you could go to, where is that from? China?
Yeah, it's
and
Asian.
There are things that keep it in check so it doesn't grow out of hand. Yeah, the Nature Conservancy, once upon a time, I was talking to a biologist there. And I said, what is it that you do? And what he is saying, I'm thinking, is similar to what Natural Lands Trust does, is that it sees an area that needs to be purchased, and if it's for sale from a willing seller, they buy it. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean they'll always hold on to it themselves. Maybe they'll save it, hold it in check for a more responsible owner, if that's the right word to use. Let's say the Nature Preserves Commission or the Division of Forestry comes along, and they would be the better recipient of that. Is that what you do
Absolutely.
With the Nature Lands Trust? You buy and then just...
Our best partners are the 5 state agencies that receive heritage conservation funds for repurchase, or can access land and water conservation funds, or can access farm bill funds to repurchase. A lot of times what I do is help the agencies find the grant they can get, buy the land tied up in a ribbon that the finance committee will put up with.
There is some red tape if you're government in buying land that I have noticed through the years.
A lot, yeah.
Not so much for the private entity or the non-government entity. And like you, where you can say, okay, it's for sale, we like the price, we buy. Is it that simple?
The resales are often much more complicated, and at least in our case, we almost always lose money on the resales to the state. We've got more money in the project than we can possibly get back. But that's okay, because you mentioned earlier we have 7,000 acres protected. That's what we're holding. I've done over 35,000 acres of additional transfers, purchase and transfers back to state fish and wildlife, nature preserves, parks, forestry, and even wild rivers, because Bad Branch is the littlest, cutest bad wild river in the state. We got some funding there. So we work with all 5 of the Heritage Fund recipient agencies and the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on land acquisitions.
You spent a lot of time in state government. You're not there now. But you were, in state government, you were the Commissioner of Natural Resources?
Well, I went to the Nature Conservancy. I worked in GIS consulting with Plan Graphics, and I came back as the Kentucky River Authority first executive director. So I tried to provide water supply to central Kentucky and manage 14 dams. And
so you know how the game's played on both sides.
And then I moved into Commissioner of Natural Resources from that.
So you know that it's tough. When you're out there now, you know exactly what state agencies are having the hoops they jump through.
Right.
to be able to hold this land you're trying to conserve.
Yeah, part of what's bad is I used to work with everybody I worked with, and now they're all young, and I'm getting over 60, and all my contacts are dropping out and being retired and happy. After working in conservation for 35 years, I'm the brokest lawyer you'll ever meet. I don't get to retire.
The hardest part about conserving land, is it deciding, well, do I conserve this piece of a mountaintop or do I conserve this piece of wetland? How do you decide? How do you do this biological assessment of which is the best chunk to buy?
Well, there are a lot of considerations. The size, you save a lot of money if you buy 2,000 acres at once rather than 20 100-acre tracts, because you've got closings, you've got title insurance, you've got surveys. We've paid more for surveys than the land costs down in the mountains, trying to figure out who owns what and fighting over boundaries. The hardest thing is the land that we want, that we've targeted because of biodiversity issues, because of connectivity issues, because of size, they're not available. I mean, they're not for sale. We're going to these families and saying, we want your property that you don't have for sale.
Can you do that? Can you play that? Can you buy only from willing sellers? You can't impose, what's that term?
Eminent domain. No.
Eminent domain.
And wouldn't want to. No,
can't do that.
Not popular.
But can you go to a landowner and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do in the larger picture, and if your land comes available, would you give us a shot?
We do that every day. And there's some of the tracts, the one we hope to close on in the next month and a half, 1,200 acres next to Blanton Forest's original preserve. I think it's been 16 years since our original request. Guy's mother passed away. He moved to Winchester. Sometimes I pester these folks for so long, they say, he's not going away, we better sell. You have to be more of a psychologist sometimes. Solve family problems. You'll have one that wants to sell and three that don't.
And you say, we'll give an agreement with you that we will do these practices so that while you don't own it, it's still a pretty darn good place for wildlife.
We use management leases as a fallback, but mostly what you want to do if you can't buy the fee is get a conservation easement so you own the development rights. And the family still can build one or two houses, but not a subdivision, that kind of thing.
We're out of time for this segment. We'll be back with our final few with the Executive Director of the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust, Hugh Archer. I'm Charlie Baglin, and you're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio, and there once was a time when it really didn't seem to matter. Why do you need to worry about all the land and all the trees? I mean, you drive down the road, you look out your car window, and there's hillside after hillside, field after field. Seems like there's plenty of that out there. Hugh Archer with the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust is my guest today. And Hugh, what do you think?
We talked about exotic species being a problem, but the biggest invasive in the whole world is humans at this point. We've gotten the ocean, we've gone everywhere, and we've unbalanced everything to a degree. And I think we owe it back ethically and for our own survival long term, because we're part of that web of life. And if you break too many of the strings, we go with it. People think we're just saving nature. We got to save ourselves and our own quality of life. And the millennial kids are starting to get it. Things are getting a little touchy out there, and they're seeing it. And I think we'll have a new approach to how important conservation is in the future, where it has been undervalued and taken for granted. We own less of our own state for public land, public use purposes than any other state in the Southeast.
People have a right to have highways to get from A to B. They have a right to live in their nice house. They have a right to be able to shop. And so these things come along with a growing population. You have a finite amount of land, and so some of that's going to have to be developed. That's just the way the world works.
I agree.
But there's a science behind the growth.
Oh, absolutely. It should be, and it costs more money to do it right, but green development and green infrastructure development. And look at Louisville. They've got $125 million in 21st century parks, and they're going to build a Gene Snyder of green parks around Louisville where they've got the Olmsted core. It will truly be one of the biggest enhancements that Louisville's ever seen by building these donuts of rural urban interface that'll keep the quality of life and add an incredible amount of recreation and biodiversity conservation and air quality, sediment control, water quality protection. We don't take that into account when you say, oh, that forest land would be worth more if it was paved for a big box development.
That's all a pay grade or two above me. What's odd is that if I were going to build a house, I'd find the plot of land and build my house. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I take into account all the things you just said. I don't know. I'm not in construction. I'm not a real estate developer. I don't know these things. But the Natural Lands Trust can't do it for free. If anyone hearing this say, I like this guy's sense of humor, I like where his heart is, I like what the Nature Commission does, I like what the Natural Lands Trust does, Fish and Wildlife Parks, Wild Rivers, I like what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I want to help, but I don't know how. What could they do? For example, if they want to just write you a check, or can they buy the license plate? Can they? We have hundreds and hundreds of $10 to $500 donors that are helping put money in. It isn't for us. We've pretty much covered, our board has been paying our overhead for the staff salaries and stuff. When you give us money, it's going into land. And $5 helps, but people like Christy Brown made the largest donation, I think, in Kentucky's history, over $3 million to us last year. That's kicked off a $10 million land conservation fundraiser. Because I've got, after 16 years of prep work, I've got about 9,400 acres and 14 projects lined up right now. But we got to be able to afford them to close. That's about $10 million. I estimated a few years ago that $50 to $60 million would give us enough money to buy all the rest of Pine Mountain if it was for sale. It just drives me crazy when 1 mile of highway could have bought all of Pine Mountain, but those are different priorities. So conservation's a tough road in Kentucky to get funded. People can donate if they're worried about water to KWA and be members. If you're worried about Pine Mountain and large land corridor projects that are going to last forever, I think we're the TNC and Kentucky Natural Lands Trust are the best deals in the state in terms of cost effectiveness of your donations. Let's talk about feathers in your cap. Over the years, everything considered, are you pleased with what's going on with land conservation? I think we're getting there in Kentucky. We're getting over we don't need to do it because we've got so many trees already hey, we better start thinking about planned conservation projects. The sportsmen have been a real driving force in seeing land conservation in Kentucky, but we really need to escalate on all fronts, the private and the state agencies. Hugh, I've known you for several years. I've never seen you less than enthused over what you do. This seems like the perfect choice for you, and so I'm glad that you're on the team. Well, I hope you'll talk to some other. Our returning chairman is headed back from the Komodo Islands, where the dragons didn't eat him. Mark Evans, a state ecologist for 25 years. I hope you'll get him on the show. He's a lot of fun and knows more than I do about some of your questions about what's an ecosystem. Greg Abernathy, I stole from the Nature Preserves Commission and trying to have a succession plan, make sure this doesn't end when I kick, because it's a long-term, multi-generational effort. Well, we've got a great board at the Land Trust, and we've got a great staff at the Land Trust. I've never worked with so many inspired people before. Pat Noonan hired me originally in 1980. He was the president of the Nature Conservancy. And he started saying, biodiversity doesn't sell, so because people don't understand it. But what does sell, I think, is an understanding that we have this web of life, that we're cutting those strands left and right.
exotic species and partially due to unplanned development. And we need to get smarter about all that balance, because we're part of that same spider web of life. Just because you got a nice air-conditioned apartment in town and never get dirty doesn't mean you aren't as dependent on that as everybody else.
One question I always ask my guest, off the subject, is do you text and drive?
No, I'm not good enough at that.
Hugh Archer, thanks for being here, and the state looks forward to your continued success with the Pine Mountain Wildlife Corridor.
You're welcome, Charlie.
There is a website you can go to find out more about the Pine Mountain Project. It's knlt.org for the Kentucky Natural Lands Trust. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglin inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside outdoors again right here on Kentucky Afield Radio.